evening. My name is Grace Hayek, and on behalf of the Glencoe Public Library, I welcome you to tonight's webinar on that terror of the Midwestern hedgerows, buckthorn. Our presenter is Matt Evans, who's the managing ecologist of Woodlands at the Botanic Garden. This program is presented in partnership with the Glencoe Sustainability Task Force and the Friends of the Green Bay Trail. Thanks to them both for helping get the word out.
Well, thank you so much, Grace.
Yeah, you presented for us a couple of years ago. You moderated a wonderful program with Suzanne Simard, who, if viewers have not seen this program, it's on the library's YouTube channel. It's a great conversation. So it's great to have you back, Matt, and I will now hand the reins over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much to the Friends of the Green Bay Trail and the Glencoe Library for the opportunity to present tonight. So we'll jump right in. I'm excited to talk to you about buckthorn as it is on the landscape and as I like to present it and understand it. And I'm excited to share that with you and also to discuss your questions. So please put your questions in the chat so that we can have a 15 or 20 minute chat at the end of this presentation. Like Grace said, I manage the forest preserve at the Botanic Garden, Mary Mix McDonald Woods, and that is within the garden's natural areas department. And so the garden down the street in Glencoe has several areas that are managed as habitat rather than display gardens. They're living laboratories and they are living classrooms, and they function as actual habitat for migrating birds and other animals that call our region home. So for those who have not visited the natural areas at the Chicago Botanic Garden, here they are laid out surrounding all of the display gardens, which are on the islands in the middle. And I manage the top right corner here, Mary Mix McDonald Woods. But today we're going to be talking more about buckthorn. And to start the conversation with buckthorn, we need to understand what our landscape really looked like before it was here. And so here we're going to present a few pictures of a healthy Illinois landscape. This is June in a savanna in Northbrook, where buckthorn has been removed for 30 years. And the Forest Preserve District and volunteers have been working to restore biodiversity and health to the Forest Preserve for that long. Here we have Mary Mix McDonald Woods at the Chicago Botanic Garden, verdant and healthy in summer with trees and sedges, lots of dappled sunlight, open air. Here, Illinois Beach State Park up near Waukegan and Zion. This is one of the highest quality places in the state of Illinois as far as natural areas go. And this is a healthy savanna. Might look a little messy to some, but it has vegetation across the whole savanna floor, and it is full of pollinator resources, mostly rarities these days, like puccoons. Here's a healthy open oak woodland, sunflowers at the end of August, lots of sunlight, shrubby in the distance. Maybe those are viburnums and hazelnuts. And then here, of course, the prairie up next to an oak grove. These are healthy Illinois landscapes. They're vegetated. They have floral resources or flowers all year long throughout the growing season, ending in November with witch hazel in the woods, the last bloomer of our season. And I like to put people in some of these photos so that there's perspective on the scale. Here we have healthy shooting star puccoons. This is up at Illinois Beach State Park as well. Here in the Cook County Forest Preserves at Cap Sowers Holdings, open, sunny, windy, full of flowers, completely vegetated. Again, I swear they're coming to an end here, but this is Mary Mix McDonald Woods again. So old oaks, young oaks, completely vegetated, dappled sunlight. These are healthy landscapes in our region. And for a long time, these landscapes functioned to support wildlife, provide food and shelter, water, healthy water to animals. They provided respite from the city to Chicagoans in the early days of the city and in the 1900s. And then we'll talk about when buckthorn came onto the scene and started to work against this. And these places can continue to thrive with health through people these days. Since we are the most dominant force on the landscape these days, all of these healthy landscapes, this one covered in lead plant and butterfly weed, scattered oaks, these depend on us these days. So what is an invasive species? Well, an invasive species is one that adversely affects the health of the environment. And sometimes one species can have a heavy hand and can disproportionately do more damage than other species can. And so today we'll be talking about one of those species, European buckthorn, which is native or natural to much of Europe and northern Africa, in the Atlas Mountains. And so this shrub is not from this continent. So that can be said as non-native or exotic sometimes is used, and increasingly less the word alien is used. But this plant is just in the wrong place. And so how did it get here? This plant was brought over in the year 1900 to the Chicago region. A couple probably trickled in before that, but it was brought to our region first in the continent and was used as a hedging. With so much open prairie and grassland in our region, and of course, after lots of the North Shore area was logged, there were needs for hedging. And so this shrub, there was already an economy for, and so it became one of the cheaper options. And in the early 1900s, it was planted throughout the region. So typically in our region, ground level diversity, the plants and animals that live on the ground are the richness of our region. They are what represent the most species and the most abundance in our region. And so truly the richness is on the ground level. And so you can see in a typical oak woodland of our region, the richness in early spring of spring wildflowers and wild leeks and bees, birds, and other animals scurrying around is really rich. It's very nice. Our region has a special combination of both eastern forests, Wisconsin forests, and the tallgrass prairie region, famous for its oak groves and the biodiversity or plants or web of life associated with them. And on the left, you can see what's typically happening in our region these days. It's been a century since buckthorn has been here, and we'll talk about some of its invasive qualities and how it has spread so quickly. But what you're seeing on the left is a picture that you'll see a bunch of times today, including some other ones that demonstrate the impact. But there's nothing growing there except for buckthorn. And in fact, it sometimes even starts to thin itself out. And so as an excellent hedge, it was effective. And now, as an escaped accident, it is pretty detrimental to the ecosystems that we have in our region. And it is not restricted just to the woodlands. So we're going to talk about identification first, just to all get on the same page about what plant we're talking about. There are two buckthorns in our region that are important for us to talk about. One of them is called common buckthorn. This one grows more upland. And then there are glossy buckthorn shrubs that grow in wetter habitats. And so we'll talk about both of those and some lookalike species. So common buckthorn, or Rhamnus cathartica, is a upland, not a wetland plant. It likes to grow with its feet pretty dry, but it will move into wet areas. It can become 20 feet tall, though often is much shorter than that and thicker and denser in its growth habit. The leaves in the plant world we talk about as being either opposite on the stem or alternate on the stem. And so buckthorn is tricky in that it is nearly opposite. So we refer to buckthorn as opposite, but if you truly start to take a look, especially when you're trying to teach somebody or learn yourself buckthorn, you'll start to say, well, that doesn't exactly look like it's opposite or alternate. And so luckily, buckthorn is one of the only things that is on the fence. It's right in the middle. So we call it nearly opposite. Most of the time it's opposite. And so that's a key way to identify this plant. It has small oval leaves. They have serrations on the margin, which is something that you might look for when identifying a plant by its leaves. The gray bark of this shrub is pretty obvious to see, especially because of its abundance on the landscape, but it's a silvery gray, it gets a little darker as it gets older. Once you develop an eye for the foliage and the leaves, the bark will come to stand out to you in winter as well, especially when you start to walk by areas and you know it's there. You start to pick up a different characteristic in its identification. And so on the right-hand side here, we also have a picture of the buds, which is a great way to know buckthorn because it kind of looks like the hooves of a buck, of a deer. And so the hooves that are represented in that bud at the end, along with the little thorn, the terminal thorn on the small branches where it gets its name, is a great combination for the ends of the twigs and the branches of this shrub. And so these are a few of the ways to know this plant, but in the winter, you might say, how am I going to know it? Well, you have the buds and then you have its growth habit, which is typically messy. It's a pretty gnarly tree. It likes to grow in every direction and it can become multi-stemmed very easily, often does. And it is in the fall loaded with these dark blue or black berries. Part of its invasive quality is the way that it spreads through those berries, and we'll touch on that soon too. So common buckthorn versus glossy buckthorn, which has a little bit of a different leaf. And here I know that we're splitting hairs a little bit, but it is important and stands out when you see the plant in its in a larger scale. And so we will take a look at that in a photo here. This one will be primarily found in wetland habitats. It looks almost exactly the same. So if you're in a wetland and you're looking at buckthorn, you might be looking at glossy buckthorn. And on the buds here, these are distinctly different. We have what are called naked fuzzy buds. They're fuzzy and they are not wrapped in a bud scale like the buds of the common buckthorn are. And so they're pretty obviously different in terms of the ends of their twigs where the leaves next season are going to emerge. And so in the winter, you can confidently ID glossy buckthorn by the fuzzy buds without bud scales. Common buckthorn will have these bud scales. So here is a photo on the left of glossy buckthorn and another one of common buckthorn. And so you can see those deep veins in the leaves really make glossy buckthorn stand out a bit more. It does have a little bit more of a shine to it, and the berries are often red before they're blue or black. And so that's a good way to know them as well. Common buckthorn often doesn't have a phase where the berries are red. So those are some common characteristics. I know it's a little bit technical, and we'll dive into some less technical things as the presentation moves on. But here we've gotten the hard part out of the way right away, plant identification, especially between two that look alike. So here they are side by side. You can see common buckthorn and glossy buckthorn. And on this center photo in the middle, you can see there's a very common shrub that looks just, or tree that looks just like these, which is called black cherry. And black cherry is very common in the region. It's a short-lived native tree that likes to occupy canopy gaps for 50 or 60 years and then fall over. And so Prunus serotina, or black cherry, looks pretty much like buckthorn. It has a smoother bark. It's more cherry brown, which is nice because that'll help you remember it. And key, when you scratch the bark, there's no orange tint, which is present in both of the buckthorns, though much stronger in the common buckthorn. And so when you look at a cut stump of a buckthorn, you'll always see this red center, which is the pith when it's young, or the hardwood or the heartwood when it is a little bit older. So there are plenty of resources to learn about buckthorn through the Lake County, Cook County Forest Preserves, Open Lands, Go Green groups from around the region, and the Chicago Botanic Garden and the Morton Arboretum. So one last time, we have these buck feet, and then I want to point out right here, I'll try with my cursor, that black cherry is very clearly an opposite leaf arrangement or alternate, excuse me, a leaf arrangement plant on the stem. And so we have a leaf bud that will be next year's leaf emerging here, and then one that will emerge up and on the opposite side of the branch. So those leaf arrangements, leaf shapes, berries, bark, and the inside of the bark being orange are all easy and common to help identify this shrub. Here's the common lookalike choke cherry. So choke cherry looks pretty similar when you look at these leaves, but there are obvious clues that are very different. The flowers of common buckthorn aren't that pretty. They're not very charismatic, where the flowers of chokecherry will completely change the forest and make it smell like cherry blossoms. And then the berries are a dark maroon or a cherry color. And so there are some obvious differences, but it does take your eye some time to adjust to see both of these shrubs. And chokecherry is a very common one, and so that's why we included it here, just so that if you think that you might be out trying to cut some buckthorn and you want to be sure that you're not cutting chokecherry, you could take a look at some online resources or refer to a picture from this slide or something like that. There could be guides online that'll also start with how chokecherry is alternate and buckthorn is nearly opposite. Okay, so now that you know about buckthorn, what it looks like, that there are two, and that they look a lot like some of our native cherry trees, where is all of this buckthorn? So that's the next part of our presentation. The Morton Arboretum and the Chicago Region Tree Initiative have put together a long-term study where in 2010 they sampled the canopy of the 7-county region around Chicago. And they then repeated the sampling in 2020, 10 years later, and these are the results. So European buckthorn represents 36% of the canopy of the 7-county region. That is up from 0% in 1900. And so that's a pretty significant increase, of course. That's an invasive species. And then notably on the bottom here, I want to point out that oak, while we have these towering oaks still on the landscape, our mighty oak, they do not make the list here because the cutoff was 2%. And so there's a drastic shift in our woodlands, in the future of our woodlands, and whether or not oak ecosystems, which support the wide variety of life here in Illinois, will persist into the future. And so we'll talk about how we can all be a part of making sure that they do. The Field Museum, so everybody's working on this, the Botanic Garden, the Morton Arboretum, the Field Museum, everybody. And so the Field Museum has put together a map where they mapped out all the buckthorn in the region, because 32% is a huge number, and we would like to know where those 32% are. And so through some fancy mapping protocols, we were able to produce this map. And this map shows that all these yellow polygons here, and I know I'm zoomed out right now, we'll look at the Glencoe area further along in the presentation, are the buckthorn thickets of our region. And so they're widespread, they're everywhere. And they range from being very large to small. This mapping project had a cutoff of a certain size so that satellite imagery could be used. But I like to show this photograph because it really is about a third of the green space that you see out there. Okay, so what has changed on our landscape is an important question to ask when understanding buckthorn on our landscape. So in the early 1800s, land cover was mostly prairie and mostly woodland, with waterways and, of course, the Great Lake, Michigan. So on the left, you can see, though, in the early 1800s, where cultural features such as towns, farms, and other human developments were present. And the rest of the map on the left is natural landscape. And so by 2000, of course, the script has flipped and the area has been settled and developed quite a bit. But the important part about understanding how much has changed is that buckthorn really thrives on disturbance, or on when the natural landscape is going through a lot of changes and never gets a chance to settle down. And so really the landscape was ripe for such a species. So what are some of the invasive qualities of the European buckthorn and the glossy buckthorn? So first of all, they have a longer growing season, which we will go into in a section right after this one. They're really fast growing. They grow prolifically anywhere they land. They have very high seed viability. So whenever you're around in the forest preserves, you can always find buckthorn seedlings. And this far into the invasion, you could say, we will always have buckthorn here, but managing it to the point where it is no longer detrimental to the rest of the environment is the goal. So we will always have buckthorn seedlings now, but we can manage them appropriately with prescribed fire and with competition from our native, natural, healthy plants and animals. So, like I said, these are happy and disturbed areas, this plant, and they can take a variety of habitats, everything from wetlands to uplands, so dry to wet, and from sun to shade. And they are able to grow in almost every habitat that we have here. And then alleliopathy, what does that mean? Well, we're going to find out. So toxicity and alleliopathy, these are two of the ugliest parts of the European buckthorn shrub and what its strategies are here. And so the berries are toxic to most animals. They are diuretic in chemical nature. The name Rhamnus cathartica comes from that particular trait. And the birds really don't like to eat this plant, but they will because there's so little of anything else left. And so that is a cycle that is continuing to increase the amount of buckthorn on the landscape. A berry that is abundant, that disperses quickly through the body of a bird and is the most abundant shrub on the landscape, is primed to continue to be the most abundant plant on the landscape. Alleliopathy is a tendency or a chemical inhibition by another plant to stop the germination or growth of another plant. And so the Oxford Dictionary definition is here. The chemical structure, which I can't tell you too much more about, is here on the right. And this picture of a frog is here because it turns out that not only does the chemical emodin have a negative impact on surrounding plants around buckthorns, especially younger buckthorns, when this chemical seeps through the soil into our ephemeral wetlands, it can cause morphological mutations in amphibians that are developing in those ponds. And so there has been a lot of research on that to date as well. And so buckthorn has a couple of traits that make it particularly nasty on the landscape for our native flora and fauna. Here it is. And so we're going to talk now about phenology, or the timing of life events. So that might be when a flower blooms, or when a baby takes their first steps. I'm just kidding. In the plant world, we study phenology. When a plant germinates, when a plant sets seed, when a plant flowers, leaves out, drops leaves. These are all the phenological traits of the plant. And so buckthorn, being from a different continent, it makes sense that its phenology does not line up with the phenology of North American plants. So when all of our plants here are starting to change color and drop their leaves, the buckthorn, used to its warmer European winters, actually thinks that there's more growing season to be had. And so the genetic programming of this plant from where it evolved, remember, it's only been here for a century and a quarter. And so that's really not a lot of time for evolution to act. And so the millions of years that it spent in Europe with a warmer winters and a longer growing season have made this phenomenon a good one for this time of year to identify buckthorn. You can see this driving around everywhere right now in the Chicagoland region. You can see all the ash and the sumac changing colors, especially as you drive the highways or your neighborhoods, and you'll see where these buckthorns have found the spaces between our lives, and they are green as emeralds right now. And you can see them bushy and thick. You can't see through them. And they are very obvious right now. And that is due to the fact that the plant has a longer growing season in its genetic coding than our plants do here, because winter arrived in Illinois and the plants said it's not worth it to have leaves anymore. And that has been happening for so long at an earlier date that we have this mismatch on the landscape. So here I took a couple pictures driving around the other day, and this middle one is from the spring, but you can see there are box elder trees, a native tree, turning yellow already, and underneath the buckthorn. And so this is the Halloween part of the presentation, where we all find out that we're surrounded and we have this buckthorn everywhere we go. And I'm really sorry, because once you see it, you can't unsee it, but it does bring to light the issue on our landscape these days. 32% of the canopy that can be measured from a satellite image is this species, not from our continent. And so what is the greater impact? Well, we talked about biodiversity, and so I want to show you what happens here through some photographs. So here in early spring woodland in our region is covered in wood betony, shooting star, and pen sedge, Pennsylvania sedge, where buckthorn invades, nothing grows anymore. Here we have oak reproduction in Mary Mix McDonald Woods at the Botanic Garden. You can see young oaks in this photograph here. This is how oaks reproduce. They grow up in big patches, and then the strongest survive and the luckiest survive, but not where there are complete 100% stands of European buckthorn. Here we have a sedge meadow. This is a sedge meadow in Wisconsin. A sedge meadow is a wet grassland. And here we have a wet grassland from a site in Illinois where glossy buckthorn has taken root and completely outcompeted every other plant. And so this is the greater impact on the landscape. Here we have that picture of Mary Mix McDonald Woods again, and here we have a picture of Mary Mix McDonald Woods from the 1990s. So there are ways to reverse this, of course. Here we have, I love showing this photograph. This is in Northbrook, and we have on the left the healthy savanna restored, revitalized, back to health. And here we have what they found in the 1970s behind the Northbrook post office. This little tiny bit of prairie remaining left. This is an original prairie, a remnant of the old landscape, and all around it slowly closing in is buckthorn. So nowadays, if you drive past the Northbrook post office, you'll see that there's not a single tree growing for 70 acres there, because this prairie is a very important prairie for biodiversity. It has a richness unlike many others, and it was completely covered in buckthorn for almost the entirety of the site. And so some of these changes can be pretty shocking as buckthorn is cleared from our region. But remember, oh, I was saying 32%. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's 36% of the region. So here's our Glencoe area. So the Botanic Garden would be here, pretty buckthorn free. Turnbull Woods is now buckthorn free. That is the woods at the north end of town. And as you can see, there have been areas that have been dominated by buckthorn throughout Winnetka and Glencoe for some time, many of which are in the ravines and in the forest preserves too. And so I just wanted to show a close-up of the areas that you may be familiar with. You might say, oh yeah, that makes sense, the Skokie Lagoons, yep. And that was a highly disturbed area. It used to be the Skokie Marsh. In the 1930s, it was dug into a lagoon system. After that, buckthorn was let to just move in. Nobody knew any better about doing anything. And so the Skokie Lagoons have a lot of buckthorn now. But I will say the county is working really hard on it. I've talked to a lot of the ecologists, and they're excited about the potential there. So what is the role of the private landowners, though? We just mentioned that the county, the staff for the ecology staff for the county, and people like me are working on taking care of this in the preserves that we manage. But what can the private landowner do? Well, on the left, we have a suburban home, regular old home, with a complete wall of buckthorn, great hedge, of course, but nothing else growing under there, doesn't support any animals, no insects eat the leaves of buckthorn, no insects do well where buckthorn is the only animal or the only plant, and other animals that eat insects will not be present either. And so on the right, we have some native shrubs in the middle of winter, those that were chosen for charisma, of course, some red sticks dogwood, and I think another dogwood cultivar, maybe an elderberry in the back. So there are lots of options to replace buckthorn like that seen in the photograph before. The Healthy Hedges guide from the Lake County Forest Preserve District, also put together in collaboration with the Morton Arboretum, has great recommendations for some understory trees, shrubs in our region, the tallgrass region. You could even get some screening from prairie grass, of course. And so there are tools like this that are being developed every year, more and more of them. And so the shift to removing buckthorn and replacing it with a healthier shrub that, if it spread on the landscape, would be a great thing for the most part, is an increasing trend these days. And there are more tools to help us out with it. So I wanted to also introduce, or maybe remind some people about some of the projects in the region. So top right here in Lake Forest, around Middle Fork Savannah Forest Preserve, which is near Lake Forest Hospital, Waukegan, and Kennedy. This site is 700 acres, and the county knew that if they didn't get landowners nearby on board, the buckthorn would just keep moving into the preserve. And so here they mapped the buckthorn around Middle Fork Savannah in the neighborhoods, and they the Lake County Forest Preserve District had a program where they split the cost of replacing it with these landowners. They worked hard to communicate with everybody about the importance of this, and the project is ongoing. It's a lot of buckthorn, a lot of landowners, and this is going to be a great project to demonstrate the effectiveness of landowner outreach and the private citizens or private residents taking care of the buckthorn in their properties to help the overall goal of Middle Fork Savannah here, which is, of course, to be a great spot for native plants and animals. On the left, we have in Evanston, the North Shore Channel, who have had Zoom calls and presentations about the work they're doing. They have volunteers out there every month and working with the Evanston Parks Department, removing buckthorn along the channel here, where it had been just hiding from society for decades, and now finding old oak trees in there and trying to clear around them so the acorns can grow into the next generation of oaks, and all the while getting people from the community out into this area to be a part of it. So Evanston, Lake Forest, there are people who are putting these tools out into the world, the Morton Arboretum, the Chicago Botanic Garden, even the village of Glencoe, buckthorn, an invasive species, what it is and how to get rid of it. You can find these tools anywhere. And so I'm happy to present them to you at this point and share with you that there are even more tools available to you. And so what can you do? You can identify the plants that you already have in your yard. I'm sure that people are already doing that. People love to garden and take stock and make changes and have a lot of fun with their yard. And I think that removing buckthorn is a great opportunity in that regard. Do your neighbors use native plants in their yard? You could go to the preserves or walk around your neighborhood and see what is happening with the native plants and which ones you like, what situations they're in. Maybe a wet corner of your yard looks a lot like a spot at your neighbor's that has a bunch of native plants in it. You can remove all non-native invasive species. I don't think that it's really necessary to remove all non-native plants, but if they are an invasive species like Asiatic barberry or bittersweet, privet, some of these species, bamboo, they wind up out in the preserves, and then it becomes a struggle to manage the habitat for health. But removing non-native species like dandelions doesn't seem like a huge priority to me because those dandelions are no threat to the prairie biodiversity in our region. Testing your soil conditions and getting to know your yard better will always help with any planting that you're doing. So studying, planning, design for blooms throughout the season. Native gardening is a whole new world of fun that people are diving into, and making their house part of the ecosystem, making their yard part of helping the animals and plants move through their annual migrations or get to the next generation. So buckthorn removal is our next section. We're going to talk about how to do it. So we know what it looks like. We've seen the impact on the landscape. We know a little bit about what to look for in our own yards and what to do. But when it comes down to actually doing it, how do we do it? So 70% of these trees are on private land, and so we will have to make sure that everybody knows how to get rid of them, or can hire somebody who knows how to get rid of them. So cutting buckthorn and painting the stump with a stump killer is the #1 best way to get rid of the plant. However, there are other ways to do it. So there are non-chemical stump removers and stump suffocators, or buckthorn baggies. And so here we have the cut and paint stump method, which will use a higher percent concentration herbicide and a much, much lower amount of it than any other herbicide technique that could be used for this. So chemical treatment of this is a very small quantity, usually comes in a little bottle with a little paintbrush, and you just paint the stem where you have cut it. Of course, in the top picture, you would want to cut these stumps a little bit lower. I just thought it was a good picture to demonstrate that there were stumps there, because from a distance, sometimes the really low stumps don't show up well in photographs. There are plenty of products out there. If you want to go this route, I recommend that you talk to the person at the hardware store. It looks like Amazon, Lowe's, Ace, Walmart all have them. And then there's the cut and bag the buckthorn stump method. And I have a friend who has their house is on well water. And so he's not crazy about the idea of using chemicals to kill the stumps. And so he uses this method, and I think it's great. It takes a lot longer, but there are no chemicals involved. And afterward, you can use the next method, which is removing the stump. So essentially, once you've cut a buckthorn, it is going to try to re-sprout, like you see on the photograph on the left, the far left. If you do not allow those leaves to have sunlight and water, although water will infiltrate the root system around the bag, the exclusion of sunlight will in time kill the root system. And so the buckthorn will try to come back and back through that bag, and it can't get through the bag. And so eventually, starved of sunlight, the buckthorn expires. And you can then remove the stump, or you can remove the stump the first time. So this is the cleverly named extractigator on the left and the polar bear on the right. So you can mechanically remove these plants up to a certain size. Over 5 inches in diameter, I think you're going to have a lot of trouble with this method. But if you have a lot of small buckthorn and you're not interested in using chemicals, I think that this is a good method for the homeowner, because you are going to go back and plant something there within a short amount of time. And so really the disturbance that you've caused there is not going to be a huge problem, because you're about to replace the buckthorn, hopefully. So our last section is going to be about what to plant instead of buckthorn. So American hazelnut is a nut-bearing shrub that can grow very thick and has beautiful fall foliage. I'd say, in my opinion, I like it better than buckthorn fall foliage. And so this plant, as a blazing burgundy, yellow, orange fall shrub makes for a great homeowner choice and also provides food for the animals, hazelnuts. These are commonly available. This plant is not rare. It is rare in our preserves to some extent because our preserves are full of buckthorn, but it has been in the horticultural trade for a long time, and you can find this, and it is a better option. Here we have wild plum, Prunus americana, our American plum, which in the early days of May and late days of April will be snowy white with plum blossoms all over. Bees usually make great use of these. They aren't bothered with you at all when this plant is around because there's so much to be had there. And then here later in the season, you can see a pretty thick wall of Prunus americana or wild plum shrubs, which certainly makes for an effective screen. We also have several species of viburnum, two of which I'll touch on here. So our native viburnums are nanny berries here, floral resources or flowers for the pollinators in the early part of the growing season in May. And then later in the season, the migratory birds have berries and are called down from the sky by the beautiful orange leaves. And then black haw viburnum is pretty much the same thing as nannyberry, but grows a little bit smaller and has a more rigid growth form, but essentially the same shrub, different species of viburnum in our region. And here you can see it put to use in a suburban landscape to great effect. So these shrubs are great options because they make for healthy snacks for migratory birds or animals that spend the whole year here, and they rely on these. And so it is no surprise that we've seen a great decline in the animal species of our region, a predictable one in terms of which animals. We're not going to dive into that today, but deer and raccoons are the winners in our landscape now, of course. And some of the animals that rely more on this wider spread of fruiting shrubs could benefit a lot from healthier home landscapes. So here it is again. This is our problem. We've had it for a while. We're very good at taking care of it. And nowadays there are more tools than ever, and we just need more public sentiment to do it. And so we're seeing that happen with Canal Shores in the city of Evanston, the North Shore Channel. I thought that was really inspiring to see. I'm from Winnetka, and their Crow Island Woods has been cleared of buckthorn and finally has more oak reproduction happening and a healthier woodland there. So with that, I am really eager to answer questions and talk to the audience about buckthorn on our landscape, what to do about it, and anything else that has come up.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was so clear and so helpful. As somebody who has personally battled a lot of buckthorn, I gotta tell you, you answered all my questions, including why does the North Shore have such a huge buckthorn problem? Because I'm from Iowa actually, and it's not a problem there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
always
not as
wondered.
much there.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions lined up already. Ooh, they're pouring in. The very first comment was "Boo hiss, death to the evil buckthorn," and I couldn't agree more. Lori wants to know what's the typical flora found in an oak grove?
Oh, well, I'm so glad you asked. That's my favorite part of my job is our flora in our oak groves. And so it's very rich. There are over 500 species in Mary Mix McDonald Woods, which represent maybe 150 spring species, and then the rest throughout the summer and fall, bloom time, I mean. So many. So I was trying to show a few pictures of completely vegetated, abundant flowers throughout the base of the oak groves, which is typical in a healthy oak grove.
We've had a couple of programs with Doug Ptolemy, and he has done his best to get out the word on the importance of planting and cherishing our oak trees. Okay, thank you. Somebody would like to know, does black cherry, prunus, what, I can't remember what you said.
Serotina.
Okay, Serotina, thank you. Does black cherry have the gnarly base like buckthorn? Same sort of.
No, usually it's a very straight single stem. When it's young, it'll look a little bushier, about an inch diameter, so a small shrub. But by the time it's a tree, it's usually straight. Choke cherry is not a tree, it's a shrub. So that one might look a little bit more like the description that you mentioned.
Really, when in doubt, the best thing to do would be to wait until this time of year when it really, or spring, when it really stands out from everything else.
Yeah.
Just like that, all that, the bright green stuff behind you. Someone else wants to know, if I use a chemical stump killer, would it adversely affect adjacent shrubs?
The answer is no. So when you use this chemical stump killer, it is not so concentrated and you don't use so much that it spreads beyond the root system. There are some herbicides that are not available to homeowners that can spread, especially in wetter soils. So I would say that no, you're safe. The only time I would expect to see anything like that happen is if you were using it in soils that were too wet, which would be contradictory to the description of how to use the herbicide. So you want to just keep them dry.
Thank you. Another question, is buckthorn invasive in its native European habitat? Or not invasive, it wouldn't be, but is it rampant?
No, it's not. It is actually sort of rare. It has also suffered somewhat the same experience that our plants have suffered here. Globalization has meant that we mixed and matched all the plants all over the world, and it's been a century, and there are invasive species from North America in Rhamnus cathartica buckthorn's natural range. In addition to that, Europe has been developed by people for a lot longer than North America has, in the way that we now engage with North American landscapes. The Native Americans were, of course, promoting most of this biodiversity, where since that era, biodiversity has, of course, been on the decline. And that's true, of course, throughout Europe as well. And so buckthorn, I love this question, is actually paradoxically kind of rare in its native range.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Once buckthorn shrubs are removed, how long does it take for the soil to regenerate so other native plants can grow? So that native plants can grow?
That is a good question, and it has a two-part answer. First of all, everything in ecology can be answered with it depends. How long was the buckthorn there is the first question and most important question. So the buckthorn will change the soil. It will add a lot of nitrogen to the soil, mostly because its leaves, when they do drop in December, they will melt away into the soil and add their nutrients very quickly to the soil, which means over years and years, the nutrient buildup outpaces the decomposition. And so you wind up with very nutrient rich soils, which is hard for our natives to grow in a lot of cases. And so it does take a while for that to fade away. But I want to say that once buckthorn is removed, common practice is in the forest preserves to put seed mix down in its place to get native plants started. You don't start with the rarest things, but you start with the common species that will come up from seed, and they often do. So you start with grasses, sedges, common things like geraniums. You will see those come up from seed in a freshly cut area. So the detrimental impacts on the soil are more long-term, and they just delay the restoration process, but they do not hinder it completely. But if you were a soil scientist and taking measurements, you would certainly be able to tell that something had happened there.
Okay, thank you. Now we have a question about what to do about the other side of the fence.
Sure.
Somebody wants to encourage their neighbor to remove a large hedge of buckthorn on their common boundary.
Yeah.
Like, you
Well,
can send them this video link if you like.
sure.
Start
That's a
there.
good place to start. There are plenty of resources out there. I think the Lake County Forest Preserve website is good, but I'll back up and say that every situation is unique. Relationships between people, especially neighbors, are between them. And so I can provide you with some tools like today to go online and print out these buckthorn replacement guides or one pagers about what buckthorn does to the environment, or just a map of how much buckthorn there is might move some people. But having this information, being so somewhat armed with this information going into those discussions, is a good way to do it. I think the number one best way is to lead by example. So if the people who are willing to do it, and the Lake County Forest Preserves will share the cost with you, and other programs and municipalities, I think, will be adopting that kind of protocol as well going forward, then I think you can demonstrate the benefits yourself. And that's especially good for those neighbors who won't even come to the table to talk about it, I think. And so those are just some strategies that I would use. But other than that, I think every situation is unique. So leading by example is probably always the best way.
Thank you. Another person says they've been traveling to upper New York State and they're starting to see buckthorn appear as it's spreading into that area as well. What can be done early in the game?
Sure. Well, managing it or controlling it with the cut and stump treatment that we talked about, especially if it's widespread landscape level. If it's just your yard, which of course it's always more than your yard, but what you can do, what you can impact, those other physical removal techniques, such as the pulling the stumps out after cutting, or bagging the buckthorn, is always a good strategy. But those strategies towards removal just need to be implemented as soon as possible. Really, the best way to get ahead of it, I would say, is to form a little group that tackles it, chip away at it a little bit. That's what has been successful here in the Cook and Lake County area, Will County. We're blessed to have our forest preserve district, right? A lot of states don't have anything like that around their largest municipalities. And so one of the best answers has always been people. People want to engage with nature. They don't want to just be in nature, but do in nature. And so we have found, of course, in our region, that is one of the best, most effective ways to stay on top of it, is to just be persistent about it. Make it a part of your life, which might not be a popular answer with everybody, but that is probably the most effective
Great, thank you. About those stumps, I have a question. Somebody said, I had a professional remove 65 feet of buckthorn against a fence, which is a huge project, and he ground the stumps out. But this person is concerned about the roots that are still left in the ground. Is that a problem?
Sure. I think the roots are probably not the problem in that case. Stump grinding is impactful on the plant. That will halt the growth for sure. But the buckthorn has probably been dropping seeds for years. And so there will be a seed bank, a soil seed bank of the buckthorn.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Have there been any municipalities in our region that have enacted policies to eradicate buckthorn to take advantage of the new state law? I don't know what the new state law is in the question.
Not yet that I know of.
What is the new state law?
I think I don't recall exactly, but I don't think so. I
Okay,
don't think there are municipalities that have done that quite yet, but I could be wrong. That'd be a great thing to research for next time.
okay. Excellent. Wow, there are a lot of people out here who have been fighting it. Someone wonders, how long does the black bag method take? Is it like a,
Oh, it takes a full season,
okay.
usually 2.
How do you secure the bag onto the
It
stump?
has stakes.
Oh,
So it zip ties down and then stakes down.
okay. And where do you get these baggies?
Online, I've only ever seen them purchased online.
Okay. Okay. Somebody says there's a lot of buckthorn in the forest preserve area around Skokie Lagoons, which you mentioned. Do you have any do you know of any plans for this to be removed?
Yes, yep, they're removing it. They have a site management plan that's renewed every 5 years. I recall in 2017 they had just done a large removal project on the Forestway Drive portion near Glencoe, actually. So they're working on it. I know it doesn't seem to be going fast enough, but they have a lot of land to deal with.
Yeah, similarly, somebody wonders about the large amount of buckthorn on the northern part of the Green Bay Trail. And I mean, this is beyond your purview, so you may not know about it, but they were just wondering if you knew anything about plans for that.
Well, I've worked with Friends of the Green Bay Trail, and I think they would be the best people to go to learn more about it. And the Village of Glencoe. But yeah, I mean, I think the Friends of the Green Bay Trail's work removing buckthorn and planting native plants is the leading by example that I really am talking about. That and it's right there for us to see the benefits, the hard work, the fun. I know a lot of people go out there and enjoy it.
Certainly. Actually, the question was specifically about why the city hasn't, or the village hasn't done anything about it.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
your area.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
They have a long to-do list too, you know.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. And it's a huge project. Let's see. Oh, somebody wants to know, where can you get a soil test done? The home kits are not reliable and the U of I extension does not test soil. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything about that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Um, and somebody says, could this is after says after the buckthorn questions, could you comment on the red vines that they have growing next to buckthorn? It looks like Virginia creeper or grape woodbine or some kind of invasive vine. Do you know what they're doing?
Sure, I would be delighted to comment on that. So Virginia creeper and poison ivy and grapevine are all native vines. These are the most common ones you're going to see. And you're going to see a lot of them because they thrive on woodland edges. And if our region, if let's say Wilmette through Lake Forest north to Zion was all woods at one point, which it was, and now it's been cut up into the suburbs and pieces and roads, and there are edges everywhere. I like to make the analogy of a pizza, a square cut tavern style pizza. When everybody starts taking pieces, the amount of edge in there increases. And so we have a ton of perfect habitat for Virginia creeper, poison ivy, and grapevine. It also is the perfect habitat for deer and raccoons. It is, however, not good habitat for the center of woodland dwelling species. There are some birds that don't breed here anymore. There are pileated woodpeckers that used to be common that are no longer, but this is what we call edge effects. So we have the effects on the landscape of the increase in the miles of edge. And so Virginia creeper, which to me is very beautiful this time of year, as is poison ivy, because it's gold and red. Those are commonly seen these days for that reason, the increase in edge. And they're native, and I would posit that they are part of the landscape that is functioning to help feed some of the migratory birds in the modern era because they are abundant and they do produce berries and they're native. That's a good
Right.
question.
Yeah, thank you. It the we're getting into kind of repetitive questions now, so I think we'll wrap it up with me just reminding people that if you, of course, you are encouraged to battle buckthorn on your own property. But also if you want to do it in a more public setting, there are volunteer work days removing buckthorn in the lagoons. There's one tomorrow, this writer says. And then, like you say, the Friends of the Green Bay Trail are valiantly fighting against buckthorn and doing great work. They have a lot of fun. They burn stuff. I mean, it's a good time, and you can go to their website and see when their next meeting. So I want to say thank you very much, Matt. This has been incredibly informative and inspiring. And to all of you out there watching, fight the good fight. Thank you. And I'll say goodnight.
Thank you so much, Grace. Really appreciate everything. And thanks to the Friends of the Green Bay Trail and the Glencoe Library.
Our pleasure. Thanks very much.